Let's now turn to Borno State, where tragedy struck on Saturday as 4 suicide bombers unleashed attack on the unsuspecting community of Gwoza. The female suicide bombers targeted a wedding, a funeral, and a hospital in coordinated attacks in northern Nigeria. Vice President Kashim Shettima has now visited victims of the Gwoza multiple bombing in Borno, saying the death toll is now 31. He says 42 victims were brought to the specialist hospital in Maiduguri. 14 people have been discharged after receiving treatment, and 26 are still receiving treatment as we speak. Though President Tinubu in a statement said the attacks were desperate acts of terror and an isolated episode, the resurgence of suicide bombings in Borno has raised significant concerns about security situation in the region. Joining me now to shed light on this dark situation is Dr. Kabir Adamu, security expert and managing director of Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited. Dr. Adamu, thank you so much for joining us on the news this evening.
Thank you. Good evening.
A coordinated attack targeting a wedding, funeral, and hospital. Does this sound familiar? And what message do you think the attackers aim to convey?
A simple message that they're still there, that the security situation is not as is being painted perhaps by government officials, and as terrorists would always want to do, to send a message of fear to the population, and in doing that, attempt to subvert government interest, sadly. No doubt there has been remarkable improvement in the security situation in the Northeast, and that has led to several developments, including the return of especially displaced persons back to their communities, the Borno initiative that has led to the surrendering of over 160,000 plus possible members of the 2 major terrorist groups in the region, and then, of course, some of the locations. So all those are very positive things that the groups are not happy about, and this is a clear message from them, telling anyone who wants to listen that they're still...
Yeah, they're still there. Let's try to draw from our knowledge of what has happened in this region in the past years. How does the use of female suicide bombers, potentially including kidnapped victims, affect our understanding of Boko Haram's recruitment and exploitation tactics?
Okay, before then, I want to quickly mention that, as you know, I run a company and we have an intelligence wing. And when we did our first quarter analysis, January to March 2024, what we saw worried us a bit. There was a 68% increase in the deployment of improvised explosive devices. And this was in Borno State specifically. The last time we saw such an increase was in 2022. And the moment we saw that, it was very easy for us to conclude that if we don't take any action, then it's just a matter of time before they deploy those IEDs on human beings. And then, of course, suicide bombs will occur. Now, why are they using women to deploy these IEDs? There are 3 principal reasons. Number 1 is the cultural reason. The position women hold in northern societies is as such that at public gatherings, they are usually not the kind of scrutiny a man would have. They would not necessarily have that. The second one is dressing. Women can dress in a manner that would not draw unnecessary attention and that will allow the contraptions that go into making an IED be used. Number 2 is the conscription element. Even though they can forcefully conscript both sexes, but conscription is just the beginning, especially forced conscription. What follows after the conscription is what leads to the creation of a suicide bomber. So the identification of vulnerabilities. Women who have lost their husbands are in multitudes in the Northeast. And so it's easy, for instance, to sit a woman down and say the people that killed your husbands is the military or the police. And so take this bomb and go and detonate it so that you avenge that husband or that child, that son that was killed, or several other grievances. And the last one is, of course, the social element around it. Unfortunately, a lot of women, especially in that community, have not been included the inclusivity element that we talk about constantly. A lot of women are feeling excluded. And so these groups try to give them a reason for existence, even though that reason may not be logical. But the fact that the other two conditions I've mentioned are already pre-existent, then it makes it easy to recruit them. And then, of course, once they do that, the indoctrination follows, and then sometimes they use drugs and other elements to deploy.
You talked about the improvement we've witnessed in the past months, but what do these coordinated attacks reveal about our current capabilities and, the military's capabilities, the strategy of the terrorists? How does this impact on the security landscape as we know it now in northern Nigeria?
Now, number one, it's an indication that it's not yet Uhuru. There is still more work to be done. And I'm worried. I say this with all sense of responsibility. Like I told you, we were able to look at our own analysis and see a 68% increment. I don't know if the Public Security Department saw that. And if they did, what did they do with that kind of information? We make our reports available to most public security departments. Whether they read it and act on it is what I don't know. But we saw it, and we're a private concern. Data, it's available. And if you know how to use that data, it allows you to develop intelligence. And then, of course, we can act on that. What is also this development is showing is that perhaps there is a relapse, a nonchalance element that has crept into our risk spectrum. In other words, because there hasn't been any IED, especially PBI, person-borne improvised explosive device, in the last few months, years actually, perhaps there has been a relapse of the security measures. In this circumstance, there are two issues of importance: the counter-terrorism component that the government is implementing, and then the anti-terrorism element that you and I, as private individuals, can embrace. So at the height of the insurgency, when suicide bombs were going off left, right, and center, people implemented those anti-terrorism measures. If you are going to a public area, you would see several anti-terrorism measures. But you would agree with me that most of those measures are no longer being implemented, perhaps because people, both sides, the government side and the people side, think that the threat is no longer there. And so the bad elements took advantage of that, and they were able to deploy. The last element, unfortunately, is a failure of intelligence. I started by mentioning this increase, but beyond the increase, women are being abducted. If you have been monitoring development in that region, you would realize that names of missing women, I imagine, are coming up. Indeed. Now, that's an indicative example that could have told an intelligence operative that something is about to happen. If you put all the elements of intelligence together, it would have given a picture of what they were planning.
Well, we're back discussing the role that intelligence can play in preventing such attacks. But quickly speak to the role that community engagement and social programs play in spreading these violent ideologies. What initiatives do you think have shown promise in this regard?
So there's several initiatives, but the one I would want to speak about is a counter the radicalization element that is being run by a radio station. And very interestingly, for anyone who is interested, you can go to RAND. RAND is a South African think tank. They did an M&E evaluation of the outcome of that radio program. For obvious reasons, I wouldn't want to mention the name of the radio station or what it actually did. But anyone interested can go to RAND. They've released a report on the evaluation they did. What that radio program tried to do is to reduce the capability of the groups to recruit and indoctrinate people from within the locations through sensitization programs, through interviews with repentant persons, and then, of course, with clerics who would speak to the messaging that these groups used to recruit their members. And I think that was a successful program. The others, like Operation Safe Corridor, hasn't been evaluated, at least publicly. So I can't speak to whether it's successful or not. But this particular program, which was based principally on public awareness and sensitization and counter-radicalization, was largely successful.
Over the years, we've talked about regional and international cooperation necessary to combat the spread of extremism and violence around the Lake Chad region. Like you said, we've seen some progress. But it will be a shame to see Borno State under attack again, seeing how much investment the current administration has made in catering to the welfare of IDPs. Precisely, do you think this is a state government problem, or you think the federal government has to tighten its belt?
So I think it's a combination of both. Security, even though constitutionally it's in the exclusive list, but the reality is that every level of government has to play a role. And there is actually a document that was developed by the government, the Countering Violent Extremism Measures. It's domiciled in the Office of the National Security Advisor. And it was that document was developed because of the realization that there are drivers of this terrorism challenge, and that to end the terrorism, those drivers will have to be ended. And so if you look at education, education is in the concurrent list. Both the federal, state, and local governments have a role to play. Agriculture, as an example, it goes beyond the federal government. Fishing, as an example, it also goes beyond the federal government. So addressing those root causes, including climate change, proliferation of small arms and light weapons, the grievances that I talked about. But interestingly, the Borno government is doing amazingly well. It has come up with the Borno model for peace and reconciliation. It's a model that can be replicated across the 6 regions of the country. But to summarize, it is a responsibility that cuts across the 3 levels of government.
Dr. Kabir Adamo, security expert, managing director, Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited. Thank you so much for talking to us on the program.
Thank you for your question.
That's